He walked through the rotating doors with nothing but a worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder and shoes that had long given up on fighting the rain. The front desk clerk barely lifted her eyes before turning to whisper something to her colleague, stifling a laugh behind her manicured hand. To them, he didn't belong there. Not in a hotel where rooms started at $1,000 a night, and the lobby smelled like imported roses and white tea. Andre Hill didn't flinch. His face carried the kind of calm you see in men who've endured too much to be rattled by side eyes or whispers. He stood in line behind a couple arguing over pillow firmness, quietly waiting his turn. But by the time he stepped forward, the line had evaporated. All that was left were eyes, some wide with confusion, others narrow with judgment. "Sir, this establishment has the right to refuse service," said the manager, Mr. Bradford, his tone dripping with superiority. "If you need directions to a shelter, I can help you with that." Andre looked at him for a long second, not angry, not even hurt, just disappointed. "I'm not here for a room," he said, calmly placing his bag on the counter. "I'm here to check on my property." That earned a laugh from the clerk, Jade, and a loud, dismissive chuckle from Bradford. "Property?" Bradford repeated, crossing his arms. "Sir, do you have any idea where you are?" Andre slowly unzipped his bag, pulled out a folder, and laid it down like a king, placing his final card in a winning hand. No one touched it. Trey Dawson, the security guard, had been watching quietly from the side. He stepped closer, drawn not by protocol, but curiosity. Something about the older man's posture, his steady tone. It didn't feel like a prank. It felt real, serious. Trey had seen enough men break down in this job to recognize when someone had already been broken and rebuilt himself stronger. Mr. Bradford didn't bother looking at the folder. "This is absurd," he snapped. "I'm calling security." "You already did," Trey said, still watching Andre closely. Andre's eyes didn't move from Bradford. "Go ahead. Call whoever you need. I'll wait." Jade glanced between the two men and then, almost reluctantly, pulled the folder toward her. She opened it. Her fingers stopped moving. Her jaw slackened. "Mr. Bradford." "What?" "You might want to see this." When Bradford finally looked down at the papers, his expression shifted from smug to stunned in under 5 seconds. Deeds, transfer papers, corporate signatures, all stamped, notarized, and crystal clear. Andre Hill wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He owned the building. Silence swallowed the room. But Andre didn't gloat. He didn't smirk or say, "I told you so." He just took a deep breath, like a man walking through a memory. Because this wasn't the first time he had stood in that hotel. 22 years ago, he had walked in the same doors, not as an owner, not even as a guest. Back then, he was just a young man trying to get hired to sweep the floors. Back then, nobody gave him a folder to prove his worth. The memories weren't distant. They sat on his shoulders, heavy but earned. Bradford stumbled back a step. "There must be a mistake." "This hotel belongs to the Sterling Group," Andre nodded. It did. "Now I am the Sterling Group." Jade whispered, "But how?" That's when Trey stepped in again, his voice low. "You mind if I ask how this happened, Mr. Hill?" Andre looked at him, then around at the faces frozen in confusion and discomfort. And then, for the first time since stepping through the doors, he smiled. "You really want to know?" Trey nodded. "Yes, sir." "I do." Andre paused for a beat. "Then you better listen, because it didn't start here. It started 27 blocks from this place, with a broken vending machine and a pocket full of loose change. And just like that, time rewound. Back to the year Andre Hill hit rock bottom. Back to the night he slept under a collapsed billboard with nothing but wet newspapers for warmth. Back to when he met Elaine. She didn't have $1 to her name, but she had a fire in her eyes that wouldn't go out. She told Andre something he never forgot. "You're not invisible. They just don't know how to see you yet." She said that while handing him a cup of black coffee, she got from charming the night shift clerk at a nearby diner. They sat on the curb together, two strangers, both broke, both unwanted by the world. But in that moment, Andre had never felt richer. Over the weeks that followed, Elaine became more than a stranger. She became his reason to believe in something again. They collected cans, did odd jobs, slept on benches, and never stopped dreaming. She was the one who pushed him to go to the library every morning. "You need to learn money if you want to make it," she'd say, "and libraries are free." He'd sit there for hours, reading books about investing, real estate, business, while Elaine washed dishes at a nearby kitchen, always bringing him leftovers wrapped in napkins like little blessings. Then came the heartbreak. Elaine got sick. Not the kind of sick you bounce back from. The kind hospitals ignore when patients don't have insurance. She begged Andre not to waste money on doctors who wouldn't care. "Take care of yourself," she told him. "Take care of that big brain." When she passed, Andre almost gave up. He stopped reading, stopped showing up at the library. He walked through the city like a shadow, invisible again. Until Trey Dawson, yes, that same Trey, who now stood in front of him in the hotel, saw him sleeping outside the precinct one winter and offered him a coat and a place to warm up. Trey didn't know Andre, but kindness doesn't always wait for introductions. That moment snapped something back into Andre, a memory of Elaine's words. "You're not invisible." So he got back up. He read more, learned more, saved every dime he got from hustling and cleaning parking lots. He bought his first share in a real estate trust with borrowed library Wi-Fi. Years passed. 1 share became 10. 10 became a portfolio. He flipped his first property with a partner he met at a free business workshop. He built, lost, rebuilt, but he never forgot. Not the bench he slept on. Not the way people looked at him. Not the day he walked into this very hotel to apply for a janitor position, and they laughed when they saw his shoes. So when the Sterling Group went up for private bidding on a chain of underperforming luxury hotels, he didn't blink. He bought it. All of it. And now he was back. Not to gloat, but to remind himself, and everyone else, what real worth looks like. Not in clothes, not in titles, but in perseverance. Bradford couldn't speak. Jade looked like she wanted to. Trey stepped aside. "Welcome home, Mr. Hill." Andre nodded, gripping the strap of his bag one last time before letting it fall gently to the marble floor. Andre stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of the room's silence press against him. Every pair of eyes was glued to him, some out of disbelief, some out of awe, and others, well, from embarrassment. But it was Trey Dawson who spoke first, breaking the tension in the air. "So, you really did own this place the whole time, huh?" Trey asked, his voice still low but carrying a mix of admiration and disbelief. Andre gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I did," he said quietly, his eyes shifting to the receptionist, Jade, who was still holding the folder as if it might disappear if she let go. Jade stared at the documents in her hands, still processing the fact that the man she had thought was homeless was not only the hotel's owner, but also had the entire history of the place in his hands. She swallowed hard, her face flushed with a mix of regret and guilt. "Mr. Hill," she began, her voice trembling slightly. I didn't know. I just assumed." "I know what you assumed," Andre said, cutting her off gently. "It's all right. People do that. It's not your fault." But Jade's face was now pale. She was shaking her head, as if to shake the very idea of it out of her system. I treated you like you were invisible," she said, almost to herself. "I judged you. I'm sorry." Andre didn't respond immediately. He didn't have to. He could tell from the sincerity in her voice that she wasn't just apologizing because she had to. She was genuinely sorry. And that, well, that wasn't something he was used to seeing. "I used to be invisible too," Andre said softly, his voice steady. "But that was a long time ago." The silence stretched for a moment before Trey, who had been standing at the side observing everything quietly, stepped forward. "Mr. Hill," Trey said with a small grin, "you always said you had big plans, but I didn't know you meant this big." Andre chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "It wasn't about the money, Trey. It was never about the money." Trey's expression softened. He'd seen enough of the world to know that people rarely went from the streets to the penthouse without some deeper drive, something that pushed them to climb higher, to fight harder. And now, standing here, it was obvious Andre had been pushed by more than just survival. "I know," Trey said, taking another step closer. "But why come back here? Why reveal yourself now?" Andre looked at him for a moment, before turning his gaze back to the lobby, to the people who had once dismissed him and now watched him with curiosity. His eyes lingered on a few familiar faces, faces that once treated him like nothing more than a shadow in their world. Faces that, deep down, he knew could never understand the journey it took to get to this point. "Because I needed them to see," Andre said quietly, almost more to himself than anyone else. "I needed them to see that you can't judge a person by what they wear or what they carry. That we're all more than the sum of the clothes on our backs." He paused, letting the words hang in the air for a moment. Then he continued. "But mostly, I needed to remind myself that I didn't do all this to be a man in a suit with a bunch of money. I did it because I had to prove to myself that I could do it, no matter how hard it was, no matter how long it took." Trey nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what Andre had said. He'd watched his friend struggle and fight against everything life threw at him. He had witnessed his battles, his losses, and his resilience. He had seen Andre's hunger, not for luxury, not for recognition, but for redemption. Andre turned his attention back to the desk, where Mr. Bradford was still staring at the documents, his earlier arrogance replaced by confusion and regret. "You still don't understand, do you?" Andre said quietly. "You see a homeless man walk in, and you think he's nothing. But what you didn't know is that the man you just judged, he's your boss." The words landed like a slap to Mr. Bradford's face. He looked up, his mouth opening and closing, searching for something to say, but no words came. It was clear now that everything he thought he knew about Andre was wrong. Everything. "Look, I'm not here to make you feel bad," Andre continued, his voice even. "But it's important that you understand something. Everyone deserves a chance. Whether it's a job, a seat at a table, or just a little bit of respect. I didn't get mine from you or from anyone in this building. I had to make my own way." Jade's eyes filled with tears. I wish I had known. I wish I hadn't treated you that way." Andre gave her a soft smile, one that carried the wisdom of a man who had been through more than his share of hardship. You didn't know, he said simply. But now you do. Trey cleared his throat, breaking the moment. So, what happens now? Andre turned to him, the weight of his past lifting just a little with each step he took toward his future. He'd fought long enough. Now, it was time to take control of the story. Not just his, but everyone's who had ever been overlooked. Now, Andre said, pausing for a moment. Now, I get to decide who gets to be seen. He stepped toward the elevator, the cool marble floors beneath his feet feeling solid and real. He didn't need validation anymore. He didn't need approval. He had earned his place. But the people around him, they still had lessons to learn. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Andre took one last glance at the lobby. He saw Mr. Bradford still standing there, his face frozen in disbelief. He saw Jade, who was now wiping her eyes, and Trey, who gave him a small, supportive nod. And for the first time in a long time, Andre felt something that had eluded him for years. Peace. The elevator descended slowly, each floor passing in a blur as Andre stood motionless, his hands resting at his sides. He could hear the faint hum of the elevator, a constant reminder that everything in his life was changing, and it was happening fast. But for all the changes around him, Andre couldn't shake the feeling that, for the first time in his life, he was truly in control. He could still feel the weight of the looks, the disbelief, the judgment, and yet, there was something different about the way it all felt now. He had always been dismissed as just another face in the crowd, just another man in a ragged coat with a sack over his shoulder. But that man had done more than survive. He had built something from nothing, something that no one could take away. The elevator finally came to a halt, its doors opening to the lobby of the hotel. As Andre stepped out, he could see the employees still standing near the front desk, some trying to act like they hadn't witnessed the moment, others not quite sure how to move forward. Andre didn't care. They could think what they wanted. The only thing that mattered was the truth, and the truth was that he had earned his place here. He walked toward the front doors, his footsteps confident and sure. Trey was already outside, leaning against a sleek black car, arms folded across his chest, a grin playing on his lips. "That was something," Trey said, his voice light but filled with respect. "I gotta admit, I didn't see that coming." Andre gave a small chuckle, his gaze steady as he looked out at the city street. Neither did they. Trey followed Andre's gaze. The bustling city stretched before them, a sea of cars, people, and lights. A reminder of how far Andre had come, how much had changed since the days when he barely had enough to survive. "You ever think about what you'd be doing if you hadn't come back here?" Trey asked, his voice quieter now. Andre thought for a moment. The question was a simple one, but it carried a weight that pressed down on him. He had lived through so many versions of his life, so many iterations of who he thought he was supposed to be. The idea of what could have been had always loomed large, like a shadow that followed him no matter where he went. "No," Andre finally said, his voice steady. "I don't think about that. I used to, but not anymore." Trey raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "Because I've made peace with it," Andre said. "The past is done. All I can control is now. And now, I'm where I'm meant to be." Trey nodded slowly, taking in the words. It wasn't always easy to let go of the past, especially when it was a past filled with struggle and pain. But Andre had somehow found a way to leave it behind, to move forward without looking back. And Trey admired that more than he let on. "You're not just running the hotel, are you?" Trey asked, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if a thought was starting to form. Andre didn't answer immediately, but the look in his eyes was enough. Trey had known Andre long enough to understand that there was always more to the story, and Andre's story was far from over. "Come on," Andre said, pushing off from the car and walking toward the sidewalk. "We've got work to do." Trey followed, falling in step beside him. The city was alive around them, the energy palpable in the air. People moved past them in a blur, some with purpose, others just going about their day. Andre felt a surge of energy, a reminder that this city, this life, was his, and it had always been. "So what's next?" Trey asked, keeping pace with Andre's long strides. "Are you going to start telling people who you really are? Or are you keeping this low-key?" Andre stopped for a moment, considering the question. He had thought about it, thought about what it would be like to reveal the truth to the world, to let everyone see the man he had become. But he wasn't sure if the world was ready for that. "I'm not in a hurry to tell the world," Andre said slowly. "But when the time's right, they'll know. I don't need to prove myself to anyone anymore." Trey grinned. "You just did." Andre smiled back, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of quiet confidence. He didn't need to shout about who he was. His actions had already spoken louder than words ever could. As they walked down the street, Andre couldn't help but feel the weight of the past lifting from his shoulders, step by step. Every door he had ever knocked on, every rejection he had ever faced, every moment of doubt he had lived through had led him to this point. It wasn't about the money or the power or the recognition. It had never been about that. It had always been about one thing, proving to himself that he could rise above it all. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, negotiations, and strategic decisions. Andre had stepped into a world he never thought he'd belong to. Yet somehow, it felt natural. It wasn't about the suits or the polished boardrooms. It was about power, influence, and the silent strength that came from taking control of his destiny. He had made a promise to himself that he wouldn't let the past dictate his future, and so far, he was holding up his end of the deal. Trey was by his side every step of the way, offering advice, support, and an occasional word of caution. But even Trey couldn't deny the fire that had sparked in Andre. It was a drive unlike anything he'd ever seen. On a crisp Thursday morning, Andre was in his office, if you could call it that. The hotel was already buzzing with activity, staff rushing through the halls, preparing for another day of service. The air smelled of fresh coffee and freshly baked pastries. It was like any other luxury hotel, but for Andre, it was a symbol of everything he had fought for. He sat at his desk, a stack of papers in front of him. His hands hovered over them, but his mind was elsewhere. He had a decision to make, one that could change everything. "Are we sure about this?" Andre asked Trey, who had just walked into his office, his face a mix of curiosity and caution. Trey leaned against the doorframe, arms folded across his chest. "Are we ever sure about anything? But yeah, I think this is the right move. You've built a reputation, Andre. You've got people watching you now. It's time to show them who you really are." Andre looked at the stack of documents in front of him. Contracts, legal papers, everything he needed to take ownership of the hotel, legally. It wasn't just a matter of making moves behind the scenes anymore. He was going public. And with that, the world would know that the man who had once walked into this place with nothing had claimed it as his own. "I don't want to rush this," Andre said, his voice steady. It's not just about making a statement. It's about making the right one. Trey raised an eyebrow. So you're saying you're going to keep this under wraps for a little longer? Let people think you're just a guy running a hotel, not the man who owns it? Andre leaned back in his chair, folding his hands behind his head. Not under wraps, just timing it right. People won't see it coming, Trey, and when they do, it'll be a moment they won't forget. Trey smiled, impressed by Andre's strategy. You've got a plan for everything, don't you? Andre didn't answer right away. He was thinking about all the years he had spent struggling, working for scraps, fighting for a chance. The power, the influence, the success. It all felt like a distant dream. And now it was reality. But what did that mean? Was it enough? I don't know, Trey, Andre admitted. Sometimes I think I'm still figuring it out. This is a lot more than I ever expected. Trey walked over to the desk, slapping Andre on the back with a chuckle. That's the thing, man. No one expects anything until you show them. And you've been showing people your whole life. Andre looked up at Trey, the words sinking in. It was true. From the moment he had walked into the hotel that day, the world had changed. But this wasn't just about proving others wrong. It was about proving something to himself. You're right, Andre said, straightening up. It's time to make my move. But as he prepared to sign the papers, a sudden knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. A familiar voice called from the other side. Mr. Hill, it was one of the hotel's managers, a woman who had been with the company for years. Andre had always admired her professionalism, but there was something about her tone now that made him pause. Yes? Andre called out, his mind racing with possibilities. The door opened slowly, and the woman stepped inside. Her face was tight with concern, her eyes avoiding his. There's something you need to see, she said softly. Andre stood up from his desk, his curiosity piqued. What is it? She hesitated for a moment before replying. There's someone downstairs asking for you. He says he's an old friend, someone you used to know. Andre's heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? The only person from his past he could think of was... But no, it couldn't be him. Is it Elijah? Andre asked, his voice barely a whisper. The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. Andre felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Elijah Gray. The name alone brought back a flood of memories. Memories of a time when he had nothing but his will to survive. And now, here Elijah was, standing at the threshold of Andre's success, waiting for an answer. What does he want? Andre asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He says he's come to talk, she said. But he doesn't look the way you remember. Andre was silent for a moment, the weight of those words hanging in the air. Elijah had always been there in the background of Andre's life, a man who had taken a different path, a path that, for better or worse, had led him down a very different road. Tell him I'll be down in a minute, Andre said, his voice firm, though inside his thoughts were spinning. He had to face Elijah now. He didn't know what to expect, but one thing was certain. Their story wasn't over. Andre's footsteps echoed through the hotel's grand staircase as he made his way down, his mind racing. Elijah Gray. He hadn't heard that name in years. The two of them had come from different worlds back then, but their paths had crossed more times than Andre cared to remember. Back when Andre was barely scraping by, Elijah had always been the one who seemed to have it all. Confidence, connections, opportunities. But Andre had always been the one who fought, clawing his way through every obstacle in his path. Now, it seemed, fate was giving him another chance to face the man who had once been both an adversary and an enigma. Andrei wasn't sure what to expect, but he was determined not to let this moment shake him. He had come too far. When he reached the lobby, the first thing he saw was Elijah. The man hadn't changed much. Tall, imposing, with a presence that seemed to fill the room even when he wasn't speaking. His suit was crisp, his posture perfect. But there was something different in his eyes. A weariness, perhaps, that hadn't been there before. Andrei stopped a few paces away from him, taking in the sight of his old acquaintance. Elijah didn't even look up at first. He was focused on something else, tapping his fingers lightly on a nearby table. But the moment Andrei stepped into his line of sight, Elijah's eyes flickered with recognition. A slow, deliberate smile spread across his face. "Well, well," Elijah said, his voice smooth and calm. "Andrei Hill, I didn't expect to see you here, of all places." Andrei didn't smile. His expression was neutral, his eyes steady as he responded. "You've been gone for a while." Elijah's smile faded just slightly, but he remained unfazed. "It's a long story, but I've been keeping an eye on you, Andrei. I see you've done well for yourself." "I've managed," Andrei said, his tone clipped. There was no need to pretend to be friendly. They weren't friends, not anymore, and the years of distance had only made their relationship more complicated. Elijah studied him for a moment, his gaze unwavering. "I can see that. You've come a long way from the streets, huh? Running this place now. Quite a turnaround." Andrei didn't respond immediately. He wasn't interested in the small talk. Elijah's words felt like nothing more than an attempt to gauge him, to see how much had changed since their last meeting. But Andrei knew all too well that people like Elijah were always testing you, always looking for a weakness, a crack in the armor. "So what brings you here?" Andrei asked, cutting through the silence. Elijah chuckled, leaning back slightly in his chair. "Straight to the point, I see. I respect that. But let's just say, I've been watching you. You've built something impressive here. I didn't think you had it in you." Andrei didn't flinch at the compliment, though part of him felt a surge of pride. He wasn't going to let Elijah see that. He had worked too hard to let anyone, even Elijah, undermine what he had accomplished. "I'm here because I want to make a deal," Elijah continued, his tone shifting. "I've got something you might be interested in. Something that could make all this," he gestured around him, "look small in comparison." Andrei narrowed his eyes. "What kind of deal?" Elijah leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a lower, more intimate pitch. "I've got connections, big ones, people who can make things happen. You've built this hotel from the ground up, but you've got potential to do more. You know that, right?" Andrei remained silent, watching Elijah closely. He wasn't sure if he could trust the man, but he wasn't about to make a hasty decision. There was too much at stake. Elijah seemed to sense the hesitation. "Look, I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here to offer you a partnership, you and me. We could own this city, Andrei. The opportunities are endless." Andrei's mind raced. A partnership with Elijah? The idea was tempting, but he wasn't ready to trust someone like him again. The last time they had worked together, things hadn't ended well. Trust had been broken. And now, here Elijah was, offering the kind of deal that had always been too good to pass up, but had always come with a price. "I'm not interested," Andrei said, his voice firm. He wasn't about to sell himself out for anything, no matter how tempting the offer might seem. He had worked too hard to get to where he was, and he wasn't about to let anyone take that away. Elijah didn't seem surprised, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps disappointment, or perhaps something else. He didn't push further. Instead, he sat back in his chair, the calm mask of confidence never faltering. "You'll regret it," Elijah said quietly, "but it's your decision. Just remember, Andre, there are always more ways to win than one. Don't limit yourself." With that, Elijah stood up and walked toward the door. Andre watched him go, the weight of his words lingering in the air. He didn't trust Elijah, and he didn't need to. But there was a part of him that couldn't shake the feeling that Elijah's presence here wasn't just a coincidence. As Elijah stepped out into the lobby, Andre stood there staring after him. The past had come knocking, and Andre had made his choice. But that didn't mean the past would let him go so easily. Trey had been standing nearby, watching the entire exchange. He had heard every word, and now he stepped up to Andre, his face serious. "You didn't take the offer," Trey said, more of a statement than a question. Andre shook his head. "Number, I'm not about to get tangled up in whatever game Elijah's playing. Not this time." Trey nodded, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he wasn't so sure about the decision. "You sure about that? He's got some serious connections, Andre. And if there's one thing you can't ignore in this world, it's connections." "I've got my own connections now," Andre said, his voice steady. "I don't need him." But as the words left his mouth, he couldn't help but wonder if that was really true. Elijah had always been a step ahead, and he was right about one thing. Andre had the potential to do much more. He had only just begun to tap into it. Days passed, and Andre couldn't shake the feeling that Elijah's offer was something he couldn't ignore forever. Trey had been on edge ever since, a constant reminder that Andre's refusal might have been too quick, too emotional. But Andre had made his choice, and he wasn't about to second-guess it. The hotel business had grown at an incredible pace. The name Hill Resorts was becoming synonymous with luxury and exclusivity. Every day, more guests, more investors, and more high-profile clients filled the spaces Andre had created. But with every success, the challenges only seemed to multiply. Competition, threats, and the weight of expectations were starting to wear on him. One evening, as Andre was sitting in his office reviewing the latest financials, there was a knock at the door. He looked up, expecting it to be one of his staff, but when the door opened, he froze. It was Elijah. "I thought I told you I wasn't interested in your deal," Andre said, his voice sharp. But Elijah wasn't there to offer anything this time. He walked in slowly, closing the door behind him without saying a word. He didn't need to. His presence filled the room, a silent reminder of everything Andre had tried to move beyond. "I'm not here to offer you anything," Elijah said, his tone unexpectedly calm. "I'm here to tell you I was wrong." Andre raised an eyebrow. This wasn't the Elijah he remembered. He had expected the man to come back, prideful and trying to strike a deal again. Instead, there was something different in Elijah's eyes. Regret, maybe? Or maybe something even deeper than that. "What do you mean?" Andre asked, leaning back in his chair, his arms folded across his chest. Elijah took a deep breath before continuing, his gaze steady but uncertain. "I know I've always been about connections. I've always believed that the right people, the right deals, could get you anything you want. But I see now that I was wrong. I see what you've built here, Andre. And it's not about connections. It's about determination. It's about building something from the ground up, even when everything around you is trying to tear you down. Andre's eyes narrowed. You've never thought that before. Why the change of heart? Elijah's shoulders slumped slightly as he sat down across from Andre. Because I've seen how hard you've worked, how you never gave up, no matter what. I've seen it in your eyes every time we've crossed paths, but I guess I was too blind to notice it until now. Andre didn't say anything for a moment, processing Elijah's words. Was this genuine, or was it another manipulation? You're still the same Elijah, Andre finally said, his voice low but firm. You're just trying to make yourself feel better about the choices you've made. Elijah looked down at the floor, the weight of Andre's words clearly hitting him. Maybe, but I've spent too many years chasing after the wrong things. I've lost too many people because of it. And I've watched you, Andre. I've seen the way you run this place, the way you've turned everything around. And I'm starting to realize I didn't have to sell myself out to make it to the top. You don't either. Andre stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. The night was calm, but in his mind, everything was in motion. He had worked so hard for this moment, for everything he had. He had built it without anyone's help, without Elijah, without anyone who doubted him. But hearing Elijah's words, there was a small part of him that wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to put the past behind them. I'm not saying we should team up, Elijah continued, standing up slowly. But I've made my mistakes, and I know you've learned from yours. I'm just here to say, maybe we both got it wrong. Andre turned to face him. There was no anger in his eyes, no bitterness, just the quiet understanding of someone who had fought their way through life and was now, finally, in control. You've still got a lot to learn, Elijah, Andre said, his voice soft but resolute. But maybe you're starting to see the bigger picture. Elijah nodded, his shoulders less tense than when he had entered. I hope so. There was a long pause before Andre spoke again. I've worked hard for everything I have, Elijah, and I'm not going to let anyone take that away from me. Elijah smiled, but it wasn't the confident, arrogant smile Andre had once known. It was different now, more understanding, more humbled. I never intended to take anything from you. I guess I wanted to prove something to myself. I was wrong about you, Andre, and I was wrong about a lot of things. Andre nodded. Well, we all have our lessons to learn. As Elijah turned to leave, the silence in the room felt heavier than before, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that came after a long, hard conversation, one that left both men with a sense of clarity. Andre watched as Elijah walked out of the room, the door closing quietly behind him. For the first time in years, Andre felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace.